panel tonight. We're joined by Anurag Thakur, Lok Sabha Member of Parliament of the BJP. We're also joined by Dipinder Singh Hooda, Lok Sabha Member of Parliament with the Congress. We're joined tonight also from Lucknow with Abhishek Mishra. He's a Samajwadi Party candidate in Lucknow North. And we're joined by senior journalist and veteran commentator Siddharth Bhatia. If I can start with you, Anurag, do you believe as a young politician that young politicians and the entire focus on them has become a bit of a media cliche, and you find that even young politicians like yourself, you're really at the mercy of very, very old politics and old political leaders, and even if you have young ideas, you do not actually have the freedom to express them?
No, I don't think so. I think in every party there is a vacuum for youth to come forward and deliver. As far as in my party, if you see in the last 1 year, I haven't given enough opportunities to deliver at the national level as well as in the parliament. And I see that opportunity for the Indian youth also, because in the past 30-40 years, if you see, the mantra used to be who you are and determines what you do. But over the time, and I think in a slow and steady manner, development is taking the center stage, and the new generation is coming forward to cast their vote, which is appreciable. In the similar manner, the young leaders are being elected and sent to the Vidhan Sabhas and the Lok Sabha to represent the young voters. And I think every party is giving ample opportunity to all the youngsters to deliver, and especially to raise the issue of development. And I think in my party, if we talk about Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, or for example, Himachal also, time and again we have fought the election on the basis of development.
That's interesting. So you're actually saying that the fact that there are also so many young voters out there whose priorities have changed is also forcing parties to reprioritize themselves. But Dipinder Hooda, just to travel across Uttar Pradesh, or even if you look at your own state of Haryana, in fact anywhere in the political heartland of India, will tell you that there is actually no escaping caste. The influence of caste might be less than it used to be. But when parties actually sit down and distribute tickets, you can see that there are very complicated social engineering projects behind each one of those ticket distribution ventures. Wouldn't you agree?
You're right. I think caste still is quite central to Indian polity, and it has remained central for a very long time. And but as Anurag said, I think the influence is decreasing as the younger generation is coming on its own. Gradually, I see other issues like development, what Anurag talked about, issues like development, more progressive agenda replacing a bit of it. It'll take time, but that's going to happen, I think.
Dipinder, do you believe that young politicians like yourself and Anurag, and we'll talk to Abhishek also in just a minute, are you able to express young ideas? Because one of the things that's held against young politicians is that many of you have inherited your jobs. I have to say, as a journalist, I'm also a journalist's daughter, so sometimes it's not true that this applies only to politics, this issue of doing the same thing that your parents did. But many people believe that this is what remains one of the most old-fashioned aspects of Indian politics, that most political jobs are inherited, as it were. How do you respond to this question of dynasty, Dipinder?
You know, it's an interesting question because, you know, and press makes a whole lot about it, but at the end of the day, we are a democracy, and our performance is dependent on the number of votes we poll each election. And I think, you know, as far as our young ideas are concerned, I am very hopeful. I think a lot of young politicians, like you said, they are doing a lot as far as bringing new ideas. And I mean, you know, if you look at Uttar Pradesh, let's you know, take the context that you raised the question in. You see meeting after meeting that Rahulji is addressing, so many young people are coming out to listen to him. For long, Uttar Pradesh politics has been immersed in divisive politics of caste and religion, and that's the point that he's making, and that's the point on which he's connecting to the youth, the progressive agenda. So I think in their own way, a lot of young politicians are bringing new ideas, taking them to the youth, and gradually you see the sense of change.
Okay, I can already see Anurag is disagreeing, but before I come to him, if I can get Abhishek Mishra. Abhishek, you came into politics from a very different world, as it were, and now you've taken the plunge.
Yep.
Are you able to identify with everything that you see? You're, of course, a personal friend of Akhilesh Yadav's, but you saw that when I was interviewing him on the campaign trail, I kept asking him, how does somebody young like himself reconcile with your party's somewhat old world ideas, not entirely comfortable with English, only now accepting computers, seeking the endorsement this time of the Shahi Imam, which other parties too have sought in the past. So as a young person, is politics all that you thought it would be, or is it very difficult for somebody like you?
Well, I think politics has been very simple for me, and it's been very kind to me so far. Because, and I think the reason for that I attribute is also because I'm mentally and emotionally, I came prepared for what is here. And the leadership at the party level helped me in preparing for that. You know, I did travel with Akhilesh ji on his Rath Yatras before I finally made the plunge.
Well, all three of you...
But I'm very happy that I made the plunge.
Yeah, but all three of you being very politically correct, except Dipinder, who did say that caste remains central to Indian politics. I think that was an honest admission. Before I come back to our politicians, Siddharth, watching this all from the outside, and in Mumbai, of course, we have Aditya Thackeray now positioning himself as a young politician, potentially in the future. Raj Thackeray is pretty young himself. Uddhav's not that old. Do you actually believe young equals new ideas, or sometimes the reverse, or sometimes not at all?
You know, I think personally, I think this young-old debate, especially in the current Indian context, is a little overrated and overwrought, because there could be senior politicians, the voice of experience, who could come with some radical new ideas. After all, Dr. Manmohan Singh, when he introduced the budget 20 years ago, was in his almost close to 60. And so he did, you know, a paradigm shift in this country's economy and this country's social system, and took us to the next level. So, but that is one part of it. The second is, Barka, tell me, I mean, you've got three people sitting here, and I have not heard either from them or from anybody else who's young, so-called young 40-year-old in Indian national or local politics, who's come up with something entirely different, entirely radical. They are merely young projections of an old mindset. Aditya Thackeray has not said anything fresh. In fact, the freshest two politicians in Bombay, in Mumbai's municipal election at this moment, are Prithviraj Chavan and Raj Thackeray. Raj Thackeray because he went out, held exams for his potential candidate. Prithviraj Chavan because he comes with a cleaner kind of image, and they are coming out with a newer, slightly newer language of inclusiveness, of trying to say we will bring development. Otherwise, it's the same old story in Bombay, and I'm sure in UP, and I'm sure in Haryana. I was very impressed when Mr. Huda said caste is a factor we have to live with. Yeah. The fact is, why should we live with it? I mean, you can move one step forward and say, yes, we have to live with it, but let's look beyond. It's not enough to say we will talk development, because that's been talked about for the last 25 years. What's so young about that? Let me take that to Dipinder and Anurag. Dipinder, you first. You conceded honestly the centrality or the continuing centrality of caste, but Siddharth Bhatia is saying, why should it be the case? Why don't we see enough young politicians and young voters together being able to change this paradigm?
No, I agree with him totally. I think, you know, what my context, I mean, what I was saying was that it remains a central issue. Gradually, you know, all of us will have to make the effort to move on. I mean, I'll give you my own example. When I contested my second Lok Sabha election, you know, there out of 9 assembly constituencies in my Lok Sabha, 2 assembly constituencies, they are not Jat dominated. I made a conscientious effort to make sure that I get more votes from those 2 seats than from my Jat dominated constituencies. And once the results came out, you know, that was a matter of pride for me, because I tried to change the political debate from caste to development in my own constituency. So I think all of us realize that the younger generation is looking for us to deliver in more ways than, you know, the caste-based thing. There's another point to this. You know, apart from the civilizational momentum that caste-based polity, you know, carries with it, that we need to break, there are also deeply entrenched political interests. Yeah. There are a lot of a lot of political parties or political people in different parties who have conducted their politics on these caste-based lines, and it's very convenient for them. There are a lot of people who just don't want to work. They just, just want to represent a certain interest group, and it's very easy for them to conduct their own politics. I think, but that's the old school. I mean, I think the younger generation of politicians owe it upon themselves to, eventually break that mindset and break that kind of politics. And I think that's what all of us want to go.
That's an interesting personal experience that you've shared, that it was important for you to get the non-Jat voters and to make your politics larger than a caste affiliation. Anurag, what are some of the obstacles you have encountered? Do you think that, in a sense, the very system of how our parliamentary system is set up, where the whip, in a sense, determines what young people should and should not say in parliament, interferes with the free expression of thought?
Barka, I think there is still an opportunity to raise your voice and the number of issues you want to raise in the parliament. Party decides to an extent on the particular issues where you have to toe the party line. But apart from that, as an independent member, you can introduce number of bills, you can raise a number of issues during the parliament session. But when we talk about the general elections, I don't agree with Mr. Dipender Hooda, who is a very, very dear friend of mine, that yes, first caste is the reality. I agree with him. But the second, the Congress has not gone in the Uttar Pradesh poll with the agenda of development. If that could have been the case, I think they could have talked about their achievement the past 7 years. But they're talking about the Muslim reservations. And unfortunately, our senior colleague and the law minister, who I respect, but unfortunately has gone to that extent of saying, even if you hang me, I will still stick to my point. I mean, now after a few days, he is feeling sorry about his statement.
Yeah.
But he was just making that statement to win the election for his wife. Do you think with that, if the senior people like Mr. Salman Khurshid will still talk about caste and polarization of the Muslim vote bank, then when we going to talk about the development, if they're in power for the last 7 years, and they're not talking about development, then when are we going to talk about development?
Let me allow Dipender to rebut that, and then I'll come to Abhishek and back to Siddharth. Dipender, the BJP, at least some of its leaders, Anurag, will talk about Hindutva. The Congress will not overtly talk about seeking a vote in the name of religion, but it's assiduously wooing the Muslim vote. Now, where does all this reconcile with a modern brand of politics?
No, if you actually, that's the image of Congress that BJP wants to portray, but obviously that's wrong. If you look at every single speech of Rahul Gandhi over the last 3-4 months of campaigning, he has focused on development, he has focused on youth, he has focused on the fact that, and he's Anurag, who's a very dear friend of mine as well, he talked about the fact that Congress is not talking about what it has done. In fact, every single speech, Mr. Rahul Gandhi has talked about what Congress-led states have achieved. For example, I'm campaigning in Western UP. There we talk about the fact that, in Haryana the per capita income is 92,000, whereas in UP it's 28,000. How the gap has increased over the last few years. Why do, migrant workers from UP have to go to Delhi or Mumbai or Haryana to work? I mean, these are the kind of issues that we are talking about. We are talking about, how we want to get UP back on back on track to becoming one of the leading states as far as development is concerned. Okay. So I think, while it's convenient for Anurag to say, in fact, let me say this, from the early 90s, when divisive politics, be it based on religion in the early 90s or caste, based politics became stronger in UP, Congress has lost out, because Congress's approach to politics is far more progressive. It's above caste and religion. It's much more about development, and I think that's the issue that we are trying to drive home to our voters this time.
Let me, I know Anurag will disagree, but let me allow Siddharth a quick word before I take a break, and I'll come back to all of you. Siddharth, do you think that's true, that the Congress suffers every time there is an emotive issue on which votes can be mobilized, or do you believe that the Congress too is guilty in its own way, as we've seen with recent controversies, for example, around Salman Rushdie?
Well, let's not forget the Congress actually is a far more broad umbrella than most other parties who have a slightly narrower focus, either caste-wise or ideology-wise or even religion-wise. So the Congress, therefore, has been in a position in the last 60 years to take full advantage of those rainbow coalitions. But sometimes the rainbow coalition formula fails, and then the Congress is the biggest loser. So with that card that they play of inclusiveness, because don't forget that they also in various states have worked out formulas of 2 or 3 different coalition, caste coalition, religious coalition. Sometimes when that clicks, it clicks beautifully. Gujarat and other places. Sometimes when it fails miserably. So the Congress should be seen as a different kind of party rather than motivated just by saying let's get Muslim votes. It's like, let's get Muslims along with A, B, C and D.
All right, we'll take a quick break. Siddharth Bhatia raised an interesting question. Where is that young leader who's showing a new philosophy of thought? We'll put that to a panel of politicians after the break. On the buck stops here, there's much talk of young voters changing the traditional paradigm of politics in UP, but is that actually going to happen, or is it more of the same? Time now for the final word from our panelists tonight. Let me take this back to Abhishek Mishra tonight. Abhishek, not wearing your party hat, and therefore when I ask you name a party leader who's inspired you, don't say Akhilesh Yadav, because of course he's your party leader. But beyond that, look at yourself as a new entrant into politics and tell us honestly, do you think youth is overrated in politics?
Well, no. I think youth is properly rated, and not only in politics but for that matter in any field in life and work. Youth brings with itself a new energy and a new vision, some new ideas, a new perspective, maybe to the same questions. But I think that's what politics needs today.
But
for example, we've talked about caste equations and whether identity can be trumped by youth. It will happen. The way I look at it is it will happen, but it will take time. It's a change process. Change is a journey, it's not a destination. So you reach there and then you look for the next change. So I think we've started moving on that line. We are changing. We are talking about, the youth and the educated people are talking less and less about caste and more about development, more and more about social development, economic development, and a new vision for the state of Uttar Pradesh, for that matter.
So
I think youth is going to trump identity politics.
You do believe that's going to happen, but Anurag, if I share the figures with you, 100% of Indian members of parliament under the age of 30 are basically sons and daughters of politicians. 2/3 of Indian MPs under the age of 40 are from political families. So Anurag, how much of that do you think takes away from what could be seen as a level playing field for young people to come in with young ideas?
To be fair to the new entrants, I believe if you come from a political background family, of course, yes, you got a plus point. But if I have to quote your example also, you have done much better than your mother, I believe, in the field of
journalism,
media.
Yeah.
So I think it's up to the person also that how he performs eventually when he get an opportunity. But at the same time, when my earlier friends were talking about the young leaders and all, I still feel Mr. Vajpayee is so popular among the Indian youth, despite being away from the active politics for the last 7 years. Mr. Modi is much more popular among the Indian youth rather than any other young leader. It is not because he is young or they are young. I think because they have delivered and lived up to the expectations of the Indian youth. They have actually delivered. But if you compare it with the others, I think they are unable to deliver. That is why I initially said that the Congress leader were unable to emphasize on their achievement in the past 7 years. I can say we were building 13 kilometers roads every day. They are building 4 kilometers. We have provided 62 million jobs. They have provided only 2 million in 5 years. There is there is no comparison between the two governments.
Okay.
But at the same time, when Siddharth was saying about the BJP, I just want to say, when BJP talk about the majority of Hindus, they are called communals. But when Congress raised the issue of Muslim reservations, nobody talk about Congress being communal.
All right, I'll give
Siddharth
the last word on that, but before that, briefly, Dipinder, to you. Atal Bihari Vajpayee is an interesting example, and history is replete with them. Even Indira Gandhi often comes up very popular in polls with today's generation. So do you believe that politics is not about age, but something very different, something intangible called charisma?
Obviously, charisma is a big role to play as far as youth is concerned. But I think, you know, we have to look at the question upside down as well. Instead of looking at charisma leading the youth of the country being able to lead the politicians, I think that's another question. I mean, we looked at the Lokpal movement when the youth of the country was actually able to, you know, lead the political thought process, and I think we need much more of that, and we'll see much more of that as the youth becomes empowered with education, with technology, etc., to lead the political thought. I'll make another point to earlier question that you had raised, Barkha, which went unanswered. Do we see a lot of young politicians coming up with brilliant ideas and actually being able to drive them home? You know, I do feel that we need to evolve, you know, our democracy needs to also evolve and fine-tune itself to the changing times when the youth wants us to deliver much faster. I mean, for example, this whole debate about Parliament not functioning at all, or like, you know, losing a lot of days. I mean, I introduced a couple of private member bills, such as, you know, the minimum number of working days that the Parliament should be mandated to function as like many other democracies, or, you know, MPs, you know, losing some part of their MP lad if they go into the well too often, etc., etc. So, I mean, these are all ideas that, for example, as a young nation, we need to think about. But, you know, I think our system currently
it doesn't
perhaps need to be a little more enabling to make bright ideas go through. So
that's a good point.
That's a good point.
That's a good point.
I'll add 2 more points to this.
Totally out of time. Sorry. Can I give the last word to Siddharth? Siddharth, very quickly, if you can wrap this up for us, just 10 seconds. I think you're hearing some honesty on the panel this evening. There is an acknowledgement that caste is still a factor, but technology and voters too have to be drivers of change. Aren't we the people also sort of responsible for changing our polity? Very quickly, I'm really out of time.
Well, definitely the people should demand that, but it's interesting you mentioned Indira Gandhi. Indira Gandhi was a youth leader in her time. She threw out the senior old opposition leaders. In her time, there was the Young Turks, who set up a ginger group. People should read their own party's history. But I can bet you this, all 3 of them sitting on your panel today, all are brimming with new ideas. Whether they will be able to translate them is quite another story.
And I think to that extent an important...
I'll quote an example here, Barkha, because malnutrition is the one issue. Majority of the young MPs have raised this issue of malnutrition.
And you've come together
and come out with the report.
And you've come together on that issue.
All of us, absolutely.
Absolutely. We'll end with that optimistic thought that all 3 of you there have ideas. Sometimes the system changes you. We, the voters, will have to change that. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much to our panel this evening. And thanks for watching. The buck stops here. All right. That's it on the program tonight. We'll call it a day now. We'll see you tomorrow night. Same time, same place. See you then. From the entire team, thanks for watching. Good night.